All right, let's go ahead and get started painting our mountain landscape. So we'll create a new canvas from the file menu, and we'll go ahead and go with 10 inches wide by 8 inches tall at 300 dpi. And now I've got a nice canvas here to work with. You'll also want to load your week 2 reference image, and this will be kind of a guide for the composition. You don't have to make your mountain look exactly like this, but we're going to go with these colors and this general composition. So here we go. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll create a new layer, and we'll call this new layer Sky. Make sure Preserve Transparency is not on, and then we'll use the paint bucket to go ahead and fill it with a nice sky color. And so I'm going to pick my hue first, pick my value and saturation. I'm going to try this and see how this looks. Nope, I think that's not the color I want. I think that's a little bit better. Sometimes you just you have to kind of hunt around until you find the color you want. I think that'll work. And then I want to make a gradient that's darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. So I'm going to shift my hue darker, pick a darker blue, and I'm going to use a very large digital airbrush to paint in a gradient. Now you want to use this brush to make the gradient for you. You want it to be nice and even. Now, when we add this lighter part towards the bottom, this is going to kind of establish where our horizon is, and that's also going to kind of establish where we end up putting our mountain. So we're going to go right about here with some cream colored, kind of off-white yellow color here to put in a little bit of a horizon. I'm going to lighten it just a little bit more, a little strip down the middle there. Let's go ahead and blend that using the diffuse blur blender with a pretty good sized brush. I'm just blending it up a little bit just to remove any kind of little speckles or anything that just might not look good when you look at it up close. So there you go, we got something like that. And then the next thing that we'll do is we will create a new layer, and let's call this mountain. And we'll choose a dark blue color, maybe something like this. We'll see how this looks. And I have a really good brush for painting mountains. It's called the Mountain Knife, and it's based on the palette knife brush preset. Now, this is a little tricky to use. What you want to think about is this brush kind of shows you a flat cursor, but when you paint with it, you're not really going to get it initially, but you kind of end up painting with this kind of calligraphy kind of style brush. And the advantage to this is, although it's a little tricky to use, if you don't try to be too intentional about it, you can get some really nice mountain effects that look really natural. The reason why this works is because you get this nice varied texture and this nice sharp edge. If you try to use something like the scratchboard tool, you can make nice mountain shapes, but they end up looking kind of flat, too smooth. So this mountain knife works really well. So what we want to do, I'm going to go back a couple steps here. I want to use a pretty good size mountain knife, and then you just want to kind of make diagonal brush strokes, tap and hold, and just kind of keep going. Once you start painting, you'll kind of see where the brush is and what shape it takes. But if I go up and to the right, I get this effect, and if I go down and to the left, then I get the other side of the mountain, up and to the right, down and to the left. You kind of make these zigzags, not quite like that, but we'll want to do something where we give our mountain some character so the edges are rough. And you can make your brush a little bit smaller if that's helpful. So we want our mountain range to go all the way across our composition. Do something like this. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of this horizon color, this lighter color on the horizon. Let a little bit of that still show. Don't cover all of that up. And you want there to be some character. This brush kind of builds up in opacity, and you want to use that varied opacity to kind of give your mountain some rock texture and some form. Then you can go ahead and just fill in the bottom. I'm just going back and forth and just filling it in real good here at the bottom. There we go, we've got a mountain. If you want to go in with a smaller brush and tweak it here and there, you can. This brush tends to work better if it's on the bigger size though. Okay, so I think we can work with that. Now we are going to do the little select layer content trick. So we're going to right click on the mountain layer and select layer content. That puts a selection around our mountain, and we create a new layer. Our selection will go to that new layer, and we will call this Mountain Highlights. And we'll do a Control-Shift-H on our keyboard to make our selection invisible. And then let's pick a nice bright yellow color, something like, or kind of orangish yellow color, kind of like this. This will be our highlight color. And we're going to have our highlights coming from the right side. And with this particular mountain, there's only going to be a few little bright areas showing that are facing the sun, and everything else will kind of be facing away and in shadow. So we'll want to use the same mountain knife, still a pretty good size brush, and you want to start painting and kind of see where your brush starts. And we're going to want to divide each of our mountain peaks kind of down the center. So anywhere you see that you want to make a face that points towards the light, that's where you're going to want to put a highlight. So in our example down here, we can see there's kind of a face here, and then there would be one here. You can really put them wherever you want. Let's see, each peak kind of has its own side. Think of them as maybe pyramids or something, or a bunch of polygonal shapes like cubes all kind of mashed together. So we'll use the mountain knife, and let's paint in some highlights here. Generally, the faster you do this, the better. If you think too much about doing this and getting it perfect, your mountains are going to come out too intentional. And you want to follow the rules by having a highlight side and a shadow side, but other than that, you can really make just about any kind of shapes that you want here. Go with something like this, and maybe there would be a little bit over here, some little ledge, maybe a little bit there. And that's all I'm going to do for my highlights. Now, on the opposite side, there's going to be the same snow, but it's going to be in shadow, so it needs to be a little more blue from the sky color, and we need to make it make the color lose intensity a little bit. So we're going to hold Alt on the keyboard and sample our sky color. Got a nice base color here, and then we're going to move it down just a little bit in value, and then over to the left to desaturate it, and we get kind of a blue-gray like that. We'll go ahead and give it a try and see if we like that. I think that is, I'm going to go tweak it just a little bit. Something like that works better. And I'm going to put in a shadow side. Now, you want to fill it in pretty good, but you can feel free to leave a little bit of this darker mountain color showing through. That doesn't hurt. I'm just filling it in nice and evenly here. Getting this shadow color right is very important, so you might have to test out some different results and see what you get. There we go, we got something that looks pretty decent. Now what we're going to do is we're filling this in pretty solid because we're going to end up putting a mask on this paint and removing some of it to give the mountain texture. So it's okay to fill it in pretty thick like this. But you really just want to establish basically where the light's hitting and where it's not. So we've got that down. Now on this mountain highlights layer, let's create a layer mask by clicking on the new layer mask button. Click inside of your mask to make sure it's active. We want to get black, so make sure you drag well into this corner here so that you're not getting any other kind of color than black. And we want to select the square chalk brush. And then we want to go into our paper libraries. And we want to choose the organismal texture called polypable. It's this one right here. Now you'll want to play around with these settings because this kind of controls the sizes of the holes that you're going to get in your paint. Give it a try here. You want to make sure that you have invert toggle selected here, and go ahead and put both your settings up pretty high, and let's give it a try and see what we get. If you're getting something like this, where you're getting holes in your paint, that's good. If you're not getting that and you're getting something that's a little too thick, you might want to go into your brush calibration, and that can be found in the window menu, brush control panels near the bottom. And you can enable brush calibration and then click on this little sub-dialog button here in the bottom right. And what you want to do with this brush is you want to make sure that you get maximum texture. So you want to push down really hard, not hard enough to break your pen or anything, but just a good hard firm stroke there. And go to OK. Now your brush should be working a little bit better. So what you want to do is you just want to basically mask out some of the paint, and you can work forwards and backwards. So if you mask out a little too much, don't worry about it, because you can switch to white and then you can add a little bit more back in if you need to. And you want to vary your paper scale and your paper contrast to get some different results. Really do this as much as you want, however you want. But the more character it has, the better it's going to look. I think we can go with something like that. And I might bring back a little bit of this white here. What, maybe a little too heavy there on the snow areas. That looks better. It's easy to be nitpicky about this. You gotta kind of just be decisive and go with it. So there we go. I'm going to stick with that. So once we're done masking, we can go ahead and apply the layer mask. So we'll right click on it and we'll go to apply layer mask, and that'll just permanently punch out that texture there from our highlights. Then we can deselect our selection by doing a Control D. And then now if you want to, you can return to your mountain layer. And if you decide that for some reason maybe your mountain looks a little too in the foreground, if you wanted to push it back into the distance, you can change your shadow color here. So we could use something like the scratchboard tool and sample this dark shadow color, and we could make it maybe just a little bit lighter if we wanted to set the mountain back into the distance a little bit more. Or if we wanted to bring it closer, we could keep it dark. In this case, we're going to keep it pretty close here. I think that's all right how it is. And if we go back to the mountain highlights layer, we can, of course, add more texture now if we want to. You can sample this shadow color and you could lighten it just a little bit and maybe go in and throw in a little bit of very light texture here and there to kind of change the color up a little bit. You want this to be pretty subtle. You don't want it to stand out too much. Some stuff like that. You could put a little bit on the white area too. Kind of helps it pop out. And then we can use the sponge and let me sample the dark color here, our shadow color. In a couple places, just tap with your sponge and tap in some texture. Just light taps like that. All right, so now we can blend our mountain a little bit if we want to. You can use the coarse oily blender You can use the diffuse blur or a combination of the two. Let's turn off preserve transparency, and let's select our mountain highlights and our mountain layer, and we'll do a Control E to merge them. We'll just rename this mountain. And we'll start with our diffuse blur brush. I'm going to try to avoid the outer edge of your mountain and just kind of blend within it. So we want to follow the contours of the mountain and kind of also establish them at the same time. So we kind of want our mountain to look like it's thrusting up out of the earth. So we want it to start out vertical with our strokes, and then as we move down towards the base of the mountain, we want to start to go kind of curved and kind of almost horizontal as we get near the bottom. So something kind of like this. If I do it with a different brush, we want to go kind of in this direction. For our highlights, we want to go kind of this way. So we're going to blend very lightly, and it'll really just be a little subtle thing that you'll hardly notice, but it'll really give some contour to the mountain. So with light pressure, just kind of following that contour, doing just the shadow first. And I'm going to do the highlight going the opposite direction. And that really helps make the mountain look a little more distant, and it kind of gives it a contour now. Now we're going to add a new layer called Mist. And this will help kind of set the mountain into the environment and kind of bring the bottom together a little bit. So on this Mist layer, we'll use the digital airbrush. And let's sample this nice bright cream color we have here. Maybe we'll just shift it towards blue, actually a little bit. Let's try this and see. We'll paint in with kind of light pressure near the bottom here, just to give it some nice mist. When we put some land in front of it, you'll really be able to see this. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a new layer, and we'll call this layer Lake, and this will be where our lake will be. And we'll just define a kind of a standard horizon with the rectangular selection tool. You want to make sure that you get the bottom edge of your mountain, that you don't have any extra here. And we'll go ahead and fill that. The color that we will use is going to be just our sky color here. We'll just sample this darker one. We'll just fill it with this for now. This will be kind of a placeholder. We'll do a Control D to deselect this selection. And we're just going to leave the lake like this for now. We really just kind of put it in here for now to help us see the bottom of our mountain. Let's go back to our mountain layer just really quick and use the diffuse blur brush, pretty good sized diffuse blur brush, to lightly blend with kind of tight circular strokes to kind of fuzz the bottom of this here and make it a little more distant. That helps a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to add a little bit of foreground land. So we will create a new layer, and it'll be underneath the lake layer, and we'll call it Land Front. And we can pick a kind of a forest green color, maybe something like this. We want to make sure that it's darker in value than our darkest color from our mountain. So if it helps, you can sample that. And then just make sure that you're going darker than this in value. It's kind of hard to see the target here. It's right about there. So I'm going to get my forest green color and just make it a little bit darker than that. And something like this. And since this layer is behind the lake, we don't have to worry about the bottom edge. We can just go ahead and just paint in something. Let's see. Something maybe like this. Just a little bit of land that kind of jets out there. Let's create another layer. Let's call it Land Back. We'll have a couple layers of land. Let's move that behind the land front layer. And sample this color here, and then just make it just a little bit lighter in value, ever so slightly. We'll have some land kind of, make it a little bit lighter. We'll have some land come out from over here too. we'll keep going all the way off to the end of the composition. All right, we got something like that will work. And then now we want to add some trees over this land. So we'll create even more layers here. We're going to put one on top of our land front layer. We're going to call it trees front. And this helps you really distinguish which layers are in which order. If you put these labels on them, it helps a lot. We want to use the Impressionist brush, this one here, and we want to have our color variability visible here. We want to set our value to 7, hue to 0, and saturation to 0. And we can use the same color we have for our land. You might want to zoom in for this so you can see what you're doing a little bit better. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use downward vertical strokes. And what that will do, if I do it up here in the sky, you'll see it kind of makes this pointed edge on top. If you go up, the point's down, and we don't want that in this case. So we're just going to go straight down. You should be getting a little bit of color variability with your trees. These are going to look like distant trees. So let's just pan over a little bit so we can see our front land here. So we'll sample our land color, and we'll just start painting with vertical downward strokes here. It's going to take quite a few brush strokes, but if you do them pretty quick, as long as they're vertical and they're not at an angle, it's going to look fine. So just try to fill it in real nice and thick. Don't have any gaps here between your trees, and if you do have gaps, go through and go over it again in a couple spots. Try to keep it vertical. And just keep filling it in all the way down to the edge here. And get any of those spots in the middle that you miss. And then what we'll do is we'll increase our brush size just a little bit bigger to do the ones in front of it. And that will really give it some perspective. This you don't have to fill in quite as much. Something like that. Just make sure you go all the way to the bottom. Okay, and then we'll sample one of these darker colors here using Alt on the keyboard. And let's paint back in some kind of dark color at the bottom. You can go up or down, doesn't really matter. There's something here near the bottom. It looks like a little bit of shadows in the forest. Something like that looks good. And then we will vary our color just a little bit. Let's sample this color we have here, and we'll change it just a little bit. We'll shift it a little bit more towards green and lighten it in value. Something like that gives it a little bit of flavor, so it's not such a static color. Maybe there's a couple dead ones there. Okay, so now we can move over to the other side. And we can play around with that a little bit the same way that we did. So we'll create a new layer on top of the land back, and we'll call it trees back. Sample our base color here. Make sure you still have the color variability, and we'll do just like we did on the front trees, these back trees. So I know this is a lot of brush strokes to have to do, but it's good practice. And you know, you're making about 15 trees for every brush stroke. So this is really one of the best ways to make a lot of distant trees without having to draw them in one at a time. So make sure you fill it in so that you can't see that hard edge from your land. So if you have to go over it a couple times, that's fine. Try not to have any trees that are floating too. You want these to look like tops. Something like that. We can make our brush a little bit bigger for the foreground. And then Sample one of these darker colors from the trees. Make it a little bit darker maybe. Make our brush a bit smaller. We'll just add in some detail here at the bottom. Now these trees kind of, even though they're different values here, they kind of start to run together, so we want to separate them a little bit, give them a little bit of character. So what we'll do on the tree's back layer, we'll turn on Preserve Transparency, we'll select the digital airbrush, and one of these lighter blue sky colors. And right where the two layers kind of converge, put in just a little bit of mist. It goes maybe over here. So that really makes them pop out now. You can really see that it's already added some distance. Let's add a little more flavor too. If we're going to have our light coming from the right, maybe we'll make some of these pine trees tinted a little bit more orange. So let's select kind of a peach color like this. And let's go to the tree's front layer with Preserve Transparency still on. Use a good size airbrush and very lightly just tint the top of these trees just a little bit. Something like that. See how that gives it a little bit of warm glow? Let's sample our sky color up here at the top. Let's just add a little bit of blue tint to the tree's back layer over on the far side from the light. This is a very subtle thing. I'm just barely putting it on there, so you might not be able to tell, but at home you'll be able to see. If you do too much, it's going to be a little overboard, so I want that to be pretty subtle. Okay, now let's create a shoreline and we can start detailing our lake. Turn off Preserve Transparency and create a layer below the lake layer. Call it Shore. And then we'll use the loaded palette knife here, which makes nice, flat, thin lines. And our shore will be kind of a tan brown, maybe something like this. Let's give that a try and see if we like that. I think that's a good color. I'm just going to make my palettes go away using Tab. And then what we want to do is we just want to create some shoreline here. So you just really just want to separate the lake color from the pine tree color. And it can be kind of variable. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight or perfectly smooth. It can be kind of wobbly like this. That gives it character. Try to make sure that the one that's further away is a little bit thinner than the one that's closer. Go all the way across too. There we go. A nice little shoreline there. Now, if our light's coming from the right, kind of diagonally down, the trees are going to block it a little bit. So on our shoreline here, let's turn on Preserve Transparency. Sample one of these darker tree colors, and we'll just make some kind of angled shadows that kind of overlap the shore. So I'm kind of just doing these diagonal lines that are going down and to the left. Gives it some character and some contour. I don't really need to do it too much on the left side. And then let's do that little tinting trick we did to the trees using the digital airbrush. Let's sample our sky color and let's put a little bit of blue. Be very subtle on the left side there. I just did a couple of very light strokes. And then on the right side, again, we'll use an orange color, something like this here. We'll tint it just a little bit. These are very subtle tints here, just barely doing it to give it a little bit of flavor. Now let's start adding some detail to our lake. So let's go to the lake layer. Let's create a little bit of a gradient here. We will select our lake color by sampling it, and let's make it darker. Use the digital airbrush, big brush, and then we'll paint a gradient that's darker in the foreground, lighter in the background. This is really just subtle because we're going to cover this with a reflection, but we still want there to be some sense of depth here. And let's sample our sky color, one of these lighter blues, something like this. We'll paint in a little bit of light across the top. Something like that.
Looks pretty good to me. If your light source is really intense, you could put a little bit more light near it. So maybe we'll do that. And then now we can work on adding the reflection. So at this point, this is a good point to save. So we will do a save as. I'm going to save this as my name, week 2. This will be 1, the first save that I'm going to do. There we go. So the reason why we're saving is because we're going to do some merging of layers. So it's always good to save at that point. Let's merge the mountain and the sky layers. So I'm going to hold Shift to select them both. And then I'm going to do Control E. I will rename that to Mountain plus Sky. And let's blend our mountain with our sky a little bit. Turn off Preserve Transparency. And let's use the Blur blender to just kind of make the edge of the mountain softer. Don't go into the center of the mountain. Just stay right on the edge. That'll really push it into the distance. Gives it some focal depth. If you feel like it's too sharp, you could go over it just a little bit with light pressure using the blur. So you're happy with that. And then what we will do is we're going to add our reflection now. So rather than try to paint this in exactly how it is, let's just use one of these nice advantages to working on the computer, and we can copy and paste and then manipulate it a little bit to make it look right. So what we will do is we're going to go to Layers, Drop All. So we've flattened our image. There's no more layers, but that's okay because you'll see we're going to do a nice little trick here. Let's do a Select All. So I'm going to do a Control A. That will put a selection around everything. You can get to it from the Select menu as well. Then we're going to do an Edit Copy. And then we're going to do Edit Undo. Then we're going to do a second Undo. So now we have our layers back. That copy that we did is still in memory. So now if we do a paste onto a new layer, we have a pasted composite of all of our layers. So let's call this reflection, and you'll be able to see it a little more clearly if we make the opacity 50%. Now you can really see it. So what we want to do is we don't want to move our reflection left or right. We only want to go up or down. So I'm just going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard. I'm going to hold Shift. I'm just going to move it around this way. We want, of course, to flip it. So we will go to Edit and then Flip Vertical. And then we'll just scoot it down. Now we want our edge of our lake or our shoreline to meet up with the other shoreline. So I'm just going to keep going down until these two shorelines intersect one another. Like this. And there we go. That's where our reflection will be. Now, we don't need all the rest of this stuff. We only need the little reflection bit. So what we will do is we will go to our lake layer and we'll right click on it. We'll do Select Layer Content. And then we will go to Select, Invert Selection. And we'll go back to our reflection. And we'll hit Delete. There we go. We've chopped off that extra top part there. We'll do Control D to deselect. And now you can play around with the opacity if you want to get the kind of blend that you want for your reflection. Now see, wasn't that easy? Now we'll want to, of course, blend this reflection a little bit. So we will use the Diffuse Blur blender, turn on Preserve Transparency, try to avoid painting near the edge here or near the edges of your canvas, and use very light pressure. We're going to pull vertically straight down. Make sure you get everything here so that this, oops, I got kind of the shoreline there. If you paint near the shoreline, you're going to get this white stuff, so that's why you have to watch out. It's easier to avoid it. There we go, something like this. Really helps it look like a reflection now. We'll go straight across horizontally with very light pressure as well. Now it looks like it's
really more of a reflection. Something like that, we're looking good. Now let's add a little bit of a water line to kind of help this look a little more realistic. We're going to go to the lake layer, and we're going to select layer content, turn off preserve transparency. And with our selection active, we're going to create a new layer, call it waterline. We're going to hide our selection with Control-Shift-H. Let's move the waterline above the reflection. And then let's pick an almost white blue color like this. We'll use that same loaded palette knife. And we'll go ahead and just back and forth horizontally, we'll scrub in a little bit of a water line. You want this to try to stay pretty thin and right underneath the shore. You don't have to do it everywhere. You can kind of just put it in a couple of spots to make it stand out. This could kind of be where the water is up against the shoreline. Don't do it too thick. Something like that. Looks good. You could put in more of these ripples anywhere you want if you just want to add some character and movement to your water. I think I'm just going to leave it without here in the foreground for now for this piece. So now we're ready to finalize this piece and add the finishing touches. So make sure you're done adding any more layers to the background here. And we will go ahead and save a copy. So I'm going to save first. And we'll do a save as. Save it as a copy. Ignore that warning there. It just says that if you have a selection active, which we do, and we can deselect that selection if that error message is bothering you. Just do a Control-D to get rid of that selection because we don't need it anymore. So now let's merge all of the layers in our composition. So we'll go to Layers, Drop All. And anywhere you feel like you want to blend, you can go ahead and blend or blur to add some focal distance. I do that a little bit to the shoreline. Very lightly just do the background trees a little bit. I'm going to give it all some distance here. Now what we'll do is we will create a new layer. We'll call it Glow. And let's add some kind of light effects now. We want to make these bright areas of the mountain look like the lights glowing off of them. So we'll make this a screen blend mode. We'll take the glow brush. I think this will work, this dark red-orange. So we'll paint just a little bit of highlight here over these white areas, just to give it a little bit of a glow. Be kind of subtle, but it'll really make it pop out. We'll add a little bit down here on our water too. It's looking pretty good, I think. And the last thing that we'll do is we'll add a vignette on a new layer. Not a vignette, we want a vignette. Okay, and we want this to be a multiply blend mode. Sample our sky color, our darkest sky color, and we'll use the digital airbrush to paint in a vignette with a pretty good size airbrush. Now, we want to avoid this area here because this is where our light's coming from. So our darkest area will be on the left. So we can darken the top. And then we want to do a lot kind of over here. Avoid going on your light source if you can help it there, or on your reflected glow there. And this corner we can do pretty dark. Let's really just draw a lot of the focus towards the center of the piece. Makes it a lot more dramatic. We'll do this bottom corner here. There we go, that's looking good. And then we'll play it with the opacity a little bit to get a blend that we like. Something like that works. And we'll zoom out a little bit here. All right, I think we can go ahead and save our piece now as a completed piece. So let's do a save. And we'll do a save as. Just gonna call it 3. And we'll do a merging of all of our layers. So we'll go to layers, drop all, create a new layer for our signature. And we'll go ahead and sign this piece now that it's done. I'm going to use the scratchboard tool. I'll pick maybe this light peach color from our mountain here. Let's try this and see how this looks. There we go. We got my signature there. If I'm not happy with the color, I can always turn on preserve transparency. Maybe sample this light blue and make it that color so it doesn't stand out so much. I think I like that better. And of course we can move it with the layer adjuster. And we'll put it there. Zoom out and take a look at what we got. Nice looking completed mountain. So let's go ahead and save this one more time doing a save as. We'll save it as 4. This will be our final version. And then we'll want to resize this for the web and make a print version. So we will go to layers, drop all. We'll go to file, save as. We'll save it as a TIFF for our print. So let's call it week 2 print so that we know what it is. And we'll go to save. And then we want to resize this for the web. So we'll go to canvas, resize, uncheck this constrain file size box, set our resolution first to 72. And then we'll set our measurement to inches. And we'll set our width to 10, our height to 8. We'll go to OK. Now we have a smaller image here. Go to File, Save As, and you can save it as a PNG or a JPEG. I prefer PNG. And let's call it Web. And just like we did in week 1, I'll want to see screen captures of your files and your layers. So we'll go ahead and do a quick screen capture of our files. And we'll call this screen cap files. We'll save it as a PNG. And then we will open one of our compositions that has layers in it still. So one of the earlier ones, like this one here. And we'll do a screen capture of this. And again, I just want to see the artwork and the layers. That's all I need to see. We'll save that as screen cap dash layers. And then now we'll prepare our zip file. So we'll select the 2 screen captures and the web version of our completed artwork, and we'll right click. We will turn it into a zip file. And we'll rename the zip file just week 2 with our name so that we know what it is. And this is the file that we will upload as our completed assignment for week 2. So that is the end of week 2. Coming up in week 3, we'll be creating an ocean bluff surrounded by trees.